Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Friedland from The Guardian in London.
And we are Unholy, two Jews on the news from Keshet Podcast. Hiya, Jonathan. We're back.
We are back. It's felt so long. In fact, it has been.
Exactly.
And we should apologise because we said we would be gone for July, and in the end, we were gone for the whole of the summer. So apologies to Unholy listeners, but we are now back.
I like it when you apologise. Indeed, Return of the Yidai. So it's our second season. To those of you just joining us now, here's a recap. What are we actually doing here? I'm here for the snacks. What are you doing here, Jonathan?
Well, we are two Jews on the news. It's the two of us, isn't it, talking about what's gone on inside Israel, outside Israel, in the wider Jewish world, and in the wider world, kibbutzing away and going back and forth. And in fact, well placed to do it, I would say, because at least one of us is absolutely across what's going on in Israel. You are Israel's foremost news broadcaster. Everyone in Israel gets the news from you. And so nobody really better placed to offer commentary on what is going on in that country.
Yes, and for anyone who doesn't know who Jonathan is, what have you been reading your whole life, I got to ask. But I would say that Jonathan is by day Clark Kent, an estimable columnist of The Guardian. By night, author of thrillers under the pseudonym Sam Bourne. So I will give you that. Well, it kind of sounds like Superman. Whatever.
Well, Clark Kent and the Wonder Woman of Israeli news. And in fact, slightly are going to be our first clue because we do have a couple of bona fide A-list Hollywood megastars on the program. And that is not hype. That is absolutely the truth. You have to stay with us to the end of this week's Unholy and all editions of Unholy, because this week we are joined by Hollywood royalty. And I may have given a little clue to at least one of the two people
you were just,
who are going to be with us.
You were making a big meal of it, as my British friend here would say. You would say that, wouldn't you? You were making a big meal of it.
Definitely. Make a meal of it. Yeah, often as a sort of, look, don't make a meal of it. But in this particular case, let's make a meal of it. And in fact, people are making a meal. You like that? Right as we speak. I'm sure as this is going into people's earphones and into their ears, they are slaving away in the kitchen because a Jewish festival is upon us. And as we always know, every Jewish festival involves huge amounts of eating. The Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is looming. And it's time for a fresh start and renewal. I think that's the great thing about Rosh Hashanah.
I indeed think so. Oh, and just one more thing that's new, because you mentioned something's new, and we'll dive into Rosh Hashanah in a minute. We will say that you can also hear us this season through the Forwards newsletter, and we will be available on El Al flights, or so they say. I have not been on a plane for a while. So
yes, but when we are, Yonit, wouldn't it be lovely to have each other's voice in our ears as we travel, wherever that's going to be? I agree, we've not done that for a while. Although I did actually have a couple of plane rides this summer, and I will tell you about those later on. But yeah, it is Rosh Hashanah. It is a time of, and this is a funny thing about Jews. Everyone else, when it's New Year, it's champagne, it's parties, it's counting down to midnight. Do Jews do New Year that way? No. We don't. We instead, our indulgence extends to a slice or two of honey cake instead of the champagne. And instead of looking forward, there's a bit of that, but there's a lot of looking backward and reflecting on the year just gone, because party animals, as we Jews are, we decide that New Year is the beginning of the 10 days of penitence and atonement, culminating in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, 10 days later. So, it isn't all party, the Jewish New Year, is it?
No, you know how that it always goes, the Jewish holidays are they tried to kill us, they failed. Let's eat. This is just let's eat, which is nice. I think Rosh Hashanah just left the last bit. Yeah, we can cut to the chase, can't we? Exactly,
To the
which is what's
cake.
nice.
Yeah,
Rosh Hashanah is a nice holiday. We have to admit. I'm a bigger fan of Purim, but you have your reservations about that. But it's a nice. It's a season of renewal and optimism. And yes, we like to look back, but we also look forward. There's this beautiful line by Israel's. She would be our perennial poet laureate, Naomi Shemer, which says, "She'afa v'shona tehei hashana asher matchila lahayom," which means may this year be beautiful and different than the year that has passed. Let's settle for just different this year.
I think that will absolutely be enough. It's like when people say, may your life be ordinary, which is apparently a Chinese blessing, and you think, yes, different will be good enough, given that 2020 or the Jewish year that's passed has been corona plagued. But I think we're going to do a bit of looking back and a bit of assessing. It's the Rosh Hashanah ritual of reflection is a bit like the Jewish version of kids at Christmas, trying to persuade Santa whether they've been naughty or nice as he draws up his list.
That's blasphemy. You just compared.
It is. As I said it, I thought myself that is terribly blasphemous to do that, because of course it's much more serious and thought through than that. But yeah, the idea is that you do weigh up. You do a sort of cheshbon hanefesh. You look at your soul. It's an accounting of the soul as you work out whether you've done good things in the previous year, and particularly you focus on the bad things. And the Jewish prayer book is there as a help, because it's got some pre-written sins you may have committed, and you stand in synagogue with your right hand and you beat your chest as you incant the words al chet, naming one sin after another.
This is a time of, don't we?
This is a major sort of guilt trip season, one way or the other. And I thought we would do that, probably not for ourselves on this podcast, but we might do it for those who are in power in the world, our world leaders, and see where they have gone wrong in the past year.
Sure. So who do we want to start with?
Well, he's the most powerful, isn't he, in the world? So I think we probably ought to talk about the President of the United States. Last Rosh Hashanah, that title was Donald Trump's, but it's now Joe Biden. So I think we should talk about how he's done. How do you think he's done?
Almost.
When he stands in synagogue, got lots of Jews in his family, isn't he? If he goes to synagogue, Rosh Hashanah,
he's the
10
most
days of penitence,
Jewish Irish Catholic you will
well?
ever meet, I think, this president. Well, we have to start with, timing is everything in life, right? If we had this conversation 3 weeks ago, I think the report card would probably be a little better. It's nice that we're giving out report cards. The school year has just started, but we believe in tough love. So let's talk about his report card and begin with, obviously, Afghanistan and the withdrawal. I have, just to say from the Israeli perspective, looking at this, the question that looms large over this whole period is, of course, what will be the appetite of the United States to deal with any other malignant actor in this region, obviously Iran being the biggest question. That is something that Israelis are very concerned about.
It's funny. I have mixed feelings about this one, because on the one hand, I don't buy the narrative, which has been around in quite a few places, which is this is just going to tank Joe Biden's presidency. He wanted to be FDR, but he's ended up as Jimmy Carter. A lot of people have been saying that. And that's for the actual sort of slightly brutal reality, which is Carter was sunk because it was Americans who were hostages in the Iranian embassy. It was Americans, in a way, who were humiliated by that experience. And it's terrible to say it this way, but I don't think Americans will feel that, because they'll think it's Afghans, only Afghans, in quote marks, who America has sort of let down with this, hasty and in some ways chaotic exit. But I have a version of the sort of feeling you're describing about when you say Israelis are worrying, will America ever get involved again? Which is, I feel, a slightly Jewish reaction, which is, look, 20 plus years ago, there was this mood in the world, which was if bad things are happening governments are doing bad things to their people, well, Western countries might intervene and do something about that. And there had been in the 90s, the Balkans, Bosnia and Kosovo. In Britain, sent troops to Sierra Leone. Tony Blair was making speeches in Chicago about liberal interventionism. And then then Afghanistan came along, and then Iraq. And so that idea is now discredited. And I just can't help but wonder if we're now living in a world where actually the message of the failure in Afghanistan is going to be to dictators and evil regimes, knock yourself out, do what you like, because America is not going to come knocking on your door ever again.
There was a beautiful piece by Anne Applebaum in The Atlantic saying that liberal democracies are worth fighting for, right? That you need to know that there is a force in this world that if a terrible enemy comes along and that someone will have the power to fight it, I think we have to kind of cling on to that, because it's a different look. America failed in Afghanistan. I think it begs the question, would someone have succeeded there? That is separate, I think, in a way, from the question of the United States as a policeman, and has it abdicated its throne. And I think that especially from our perspective, right, living in probably the most volatile region in the world, you want to hope that that isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, I should be really clear about this. When it happened at the time, I was against the United States invading, and Britain at its side, invading Afghanistan. Absolutely. Of course, the United States was going to have to hit back at al-Qaeda bases and sites inside Afghanistan after 9/11. But that was how I imagined it operating, a kind of police action, where you hit specific targets rather than invading and occupying the whole country. And the reason I thought that, let's remember when this was. It was 2001, and partly what I had in my mind was the withdrawal just the previous year by Israel under Ehud Barak of its forces that had been in Lebanon for the best part of a quarter century. And I thought the lesson of that, and you could say this about the wider Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza as well, but the lesson I thought the world should take from that is, it's very easy to get in, very hard to get out. And you've got to be really, really sure that, you don't just want to hit your enemy in their military targets, terrorist camps, etc., that you're really ready to reshape a whole country, nation build a democracy. That to me was always for the birds, especially in Afghanistan, given its history. It's the graveyard of empires. Those who the gods want to destroy, they invade Afghanistan. It's always been doomed. So I always thought at the time, bad idea, but just that principle, which I think we both mentioned, and you mentioned, Anne Applebaum, that you don't really want a world of impunity where, and we know we live in one, we've always lived in one, but there was that brief flowering of the idea that, sometimes if bad things are happening, you may not get away with it.
Aaron David Miller, obviously an experienced diplomat, tweeted something that I can relate to. He said the entire Afghan enterprise reveals the flaws in American judgment and competency and the limits to America's power and influence, not their permanent demise. And I think it does speak to this. You mentioned the Israelis leaving southern Lebanon. Also, very chaotic for Israel and chaotic even more for the southern Lebanese army. Israel since has, not actually since then, but for the past, let's say, decade, engages in something that is called the campaign between the wars, right? You kind of work with precision attacks under the radar in faraway countries to avoid a total war. That is what Israel is doing. Maybe that is part of the future plan of the United States. But here there really was a case of overreach, right? It was trying to nation build, it was trying to bring democracy. This is just a terrible tragedy. I mean, if you think of the fact that we would talk 20 years ago and say in 20 years we would be discussing the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, negotiating with the Taliban to withdraw. The Taliban is still there. That's a tragedy. The whole withdrawal and the way it was done was a tragedy. The question is, what kind of America will emerge from this? And this is an argument, and what is the U.S.'s role in the world is an argument that we're not having now. I mean, Jefferson and Hamilton were having it in the 18th century, right? So I think it's essential for, it's hard for someone not from the U.S. to have this. This is what America should do. But I think that from my point of view, I hope that they choose to still take part in what is happening in this region.
So I think we agree there is plenty on the al-Khait agenda for Joe Biden, for the Biden administration, actually, truthfully, for all the allied countries of the world who were involved one way and another with Afghanistan. There is plenty of guilt to go around and reflection to be had. We did promise a Hollywood A-lister, and we have one. We are about to hear... Well, why don't we let him introduce himself?
Hello, Unholy listeners. Hi, Yonit and Johnny. It's Sacha Baron Cohen here with my nomination for Mensch of the Year. I know it sounds very echoey, but that's because I'm in my bedroom. It's huge, and it's, it has no carpet or any furnishings or even a mattress, because that's what we do in Hollywood. My Mensch of the Year is Mark Benioff. Why, I hear you ask? Because he sent PPE to a lot of health workers in need this year. I cheekily, some would use the term chutzpah-dickily, which is not actually a term, but some of you would use it, asked him to send some PPE to NHS nurses and doctors when they didn't have any protective clothing at the beginning of COVID. And amazingly, despite him being American and having no connection with England or Britain, he helped send over a few plane loads of PPE. So, Mensch of the Year, Mark Benioff, thank you very much. Johnny, Yonit, Unholy listeners, I'm not in a men's bathroom. It's time for me to go to sleep in my Hollywood bedroom. Good night.
So, lot to unpack there, Johnny.
There's lots going on there, isn't there?
Go back to that in a minute. I have so much to say. I want us to have an extra podcast episode just to discuss this recording. Let's start with good choice.
Great choice. I mean, I have to say, I wasn't super familiar with American internet entrepreneur and billionaire Mark Benioff. And I didn't know that story about the NHS, of course, being the National Health Service here in Britain, you know, our taxpayer-funded public resource, which has got the status of kind of royalty in this country. Who knew? But and Sacha himself involved in getting Mark Benioff to help. So
right.
he, you know, there's lots of eye-openers there for me.
Yeah, and just thinking the fact that this is all supposed to be the government's role, not only in your country, but in many other countries. And the fact that philanthropists are stepping in is something to note in itself, I think. But yes, good choice. Now, can I ask how you two know each other, Jonathan?
Well, he slightly outed me with the reference to Johnny there, because it is quite true that people who have known me a very long time, and he has, call me Johnny. And that's because I was the madrich, or youth leader, for Sacha Baron Cohen in the youth movement that we were both members of back in the 1980s. Yes. It is true. And I'm where everyone who knows me from that, it calls me Johnny. The youth movement in question being Habonim Dror, which is a kind of kibbutz. It's an arm of the kibbutz movement. It believes in socialism and, you know, summer camps and hiking through the Welsh countryside. And I was the, you know, responsible adult, and he was the precociously clever and funny 12-year-old boy, and then carried on all the way through until, you know, he was a student and I was just in my last year or so there. So I've known him a very long time. He remains a very good friend, and that's why he still calls me Johnny.
So wait. First of all, Welsh countryside supposed to be the kibbutz kind of thing? I'm just trying to figure out.
Exactly. Well, you know, okay, should we get into this? So, yes, the idea was of youth movements is they were preparing their members, you know, hachshara, for life as, you know, dairy farmers in the Galil or whatever. And so that lived on in the form of 2-week summer camps in the Welsh countryside, hiking around. And Sacha will remember this, that I was age 17 in charge of a group of 12-year-olds. And we were hiking around, and we did a little night hike. And my sense of direction, which has actually only got worse, was so bad that I managed to get these kids completely lost in the middle of the Welsh countryside. And Sacha was there for that experience. It may have put him on the course, on the path that he is now on, that has led him all the way to that
a new genre
Hollywood
of survival comedy. So how did you finally find your way out? I assume you did, since we're sitting here. So
we did finally find our way out, yes. Oh. And I realized that I'd wandered. Instead of being in the countryside, I heard the clink of milk bottles at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and realized we'd actually managed to walk into a suburb where there was a milkman delivering milk. Instead of it being in the kind of rolling hills of the or Welsh valleys, I'd managed to lead all these kids in completely the wrong direction into a suburb, and I then had to sort of march them all out again. I think a train or a bus was involved eventually. It was an abject failure, but Sacha's forgiven me for it, and you can hear the result.
I know that you would never do this because you're so modest, but there is of course, Habonim Dror is on Wikipedia, and there's a category, famous graduates. I'm just multitasking while we're talking. You're on it, of course.
I didn't know
you
that.
are,
That's
and I knew you would ever check this. But you're right under Stanley Fischer, the vice chair of the Federal Reserve, and Golda Meir is here.
Wow!
Look at that. Chaim Herzog is here. I assume you weren't at the same time there, and Seth Rogen, and of course Sacha Baron Cohen. This is a Netflix comedy waiting to happen. Someone needs to pick this up.
Well, you are right to mention comedy, because it is freakish how many people in British comedy, Seth Rogen, of course, as well, in big names in British comedy, were in this tiny youth movement. I mean, we are talking maximum 200 people at any one time were in this organization. Sometimes there'd be conversations about, are we a mass movement? And you'd think, no, there's 200 people here. And David Baddiel, who's a massive stand-up comedian in this country, Mike Lee, the Oscar-winning film director, was in
What happened to
Habonim.
him in camp then?
Because
he kind of
Dan Patterson, who created a comedy show called Whose Line Is It Anyway, that went to America and was very big. They were all in Habonim. And in fact, when we gather, I am the odd one out because I'm kind of the straight man in this room of people who have become comedy giants. And Sacha, of course, none more giant than him.
I think you're a comedy giant. Okay, I just want to say 2 things. By season 5, I'm calling you Johnny. That's it. And secondly, I have friends in high places too. So you might listen to a recording a little later in this program.
If the listener thinks we are getting a little bit competitive about this, they would be completely right. And you actually managed to pull in your contributor, and it then compelled me to match your contribution with Sacha Baron Cohen. People are going to hear your one later, and I think they will be wowed, is my prediction.
Okay, so wait, we gave out our report card to the American president. I think we should probably also talk about the Israeli prime minister.
We should, because it's a new prime minister. This time last year when it was Rosh Hashanah, it was the same as it had been the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, and it was Netanyahu, and it's now Naftali Bennett. So I have to ask you, and it's early because he's not had long, but it was early for Biden too. What are your initial... does he have to stand in shul and say a few al-Khaits?
Well, first of all, I mean, he, contrary to the American president, he actually will be standing in shul. But I will say this. He's been prime minister less than 3 months. I think if we had had this discussion a year ago, I'm not sure we would have A, believed it would be Naftali Bennett prime minister, and B, believed he'd have 3 months. So first of all, this unlikely coalition with this, almost accidental prime minister, right? The fact that it has the hard left and the nationalist right and the centrist and an Arab party for the first time actively part of an Israeli coalition is still going strong. It probably will pass a budget soon. We have to say that in Israel, if you don't pass a budget, then the government falls and you go to election. And, he is very clear on saying, I will reset the tone. I will reset everything that has to do with the way that we talk to each other, the national vibe, right? The way he's avoiding attacking the left like he has done in the past. He's also met with the American president. It was very important for him to show that the optics, right, after 12 years of another prime minister, to show the fact that he is indeed in charge. I was really interested. That meeting was very interesting because if I told you a year ago, right, that a Democrat president and a Democratic White House would accept with open arms an Israeli that used to lead the settler movement, and not only that, but on the eve of his visit to the White House, gives an interview to the New York Times and says, a Palestinian state is not going to happen on my watch. That is pretty incredible, and it's indicative not of, I think, who Naftali Bennett is, but of who he isn't.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what I was going to say. The who he isn't thing is you realize the ABB movement, the anyone but Bibi sentiment, rather, in Washington was so sharp and so pronounced that they were ready to roll out the red carpet, even, as you say, to a former settler leader who doubled down on the eve of going on his hardline position. Didn't matter. As far as the Biden administration is concerned, you're not Netanyahu, and therefore you are welcome here. And it just underlines, I mean, they never really did a job of hiding it, but underlines how little love was lost between Team Biden and Team Netanyahu, and I think, exactly. It's not about a personal affection, particularly for Naftali Bennett. But quite just like you were saying before, that it would be enough, quoting Naomi Shemer, if the next year is different. In a way, just that the fact that the Bennett-Lapid government exists counts as a huge achievement, whether it's strong or weak, whatever. It has confounded so many predictions, not yours. You predicted it on this podcast. Even before the Israeli elections had happened, you said that could happen, and it has. I think it's amazing that it is still intact, and you've got to say, every day that it's there, it gets people used to it being there and establishes it and entrenches it more. So he's going to be, I think when it comes to chest beating, he will go quite, light on it, go easy on himself, because he'll feel we did it. We got there, and I am the prime minister, despite people's expectations.
Of course, it still needs to be said that he is a prime minister without a political base, which is a very strange phenomenon, right? I mean, he got 6% of the votes. We talked about this at length on season 1, right? How he actually became prime minister. But the fact is that his natural base, right, the settler movement, or the more liberal part of the settler movement, the religious Zionists, they don't support him in droves. They still support Benjamin Netanyahu. When you see the polls in Israel, the Netanyahu-Gantz government gets 46% now of approval rating. You might think that's not very high, but the Bennett Lapid government is getting 33%. So they still have a problem. Again, he can say to himself, I'm a prime minister for 2 years, right, until the rotation agreement turns to the premiership to Lapid. I'll do whatever I want in those 2 years, and I don't need a political base. But if he does want a future in politics, he's 49 years old, this could be a problem. Now, of course, another problem for this leader, the same as it is a problem for the American leader and for the British leader and every other leader around the world, is obviously COVID. Now, Israel, and Naftali Bennett took a pretty big decision here to give the booster. He gave it before anyone else in the world gave it, and then he opened it up to age 12 and up. But the numbers in Israel are still extremely high, right? We are the top of the list of daily new confirmed COVID cases per million people. 11,000 confirmed a day in Israel. So the booster shots are, for now, helping with the severe cases, and they are in decline. But when this is all rumbling in the background, schools are open, Rosh Hashanah is upon us with a huge family gatherings, people are flying abroad and coming back. It kind of feels like a collective experiment in wishful thinking. 5.5 million Israelis have been vaccinated with 2 doses. 2.5 million have received the booster. We're a nation of 9 million. So that's pretty good numbers. The problem really is the Delta variant that has, taken everything and changed this picture completely. And we'll see what will happen. But a lot of people are really concerned. Definitely that kind of relief you feel on the beginning of September when you're not talking about myself specifically, put your kids in school is a little bit, put in the shadow of the fact that you're kind of worried about COVID and what will that do when schools are completely open. And it might, if this is a success, if the booster is a success, then Naftali Bennett could be a successful prime minister. If it isn't, he's in very, very dangerous waters.
We mentioned talking about flying around and how we want to. I did do, as I mentioned, a couple of flights this summer not for a vacation, unfortunately, but for a book that I'm working on. I went to Poland and to Slovakia, and I was with actually a colleague who carries an Israeli passport. And what was really interesting was it was much easier for him to get in and out of these countries than it was for me with a UK passport. And that was, I'm sure, because fixed in the European mind, maybe the American mind, I think as well, very definitely with America, is the idea that Israel was a real leader on vaccination. They're way ahead and they're covered. And so there's a kind of lag in the policy where governments still think Israel is right ahead there and basically has dealt with it. Even though, as you say, with 11,000 cases a day, they really haven't. Israel benefits from its early success, that early sprint it did with the vaccine. So even if it's now staggering a bit, it doesn't matter in terms of the way the world sees Israel. It still thinks it is fine. In terms of how the world sees Israel, I think that's a good cue for our next Hollywood A-list star guest on Unholy.
Hello there, Unholy listeners. Hello, Yonit and Jonathan. This is Gadot here. Surprise, surprise, my Mensch of the year is actually a Menschette. Looking back at this year, there were so many brave women, but one that really stood out was the amazing triumph of Shira Isakov, a young, beautiful woman from Mitzpe Ramon in Israel. Exactly 1 year ago, she was gravely wounded after her ex-husband stabbed her for 20 times. And she was saved only thanks to her neighbor who heard her crying for help. While she was still in recovery, she decided that she shouldn't be the one who should feel ashamed of this. It's the attacker who should be ashamed. And with a brave voice and strong sense of justice, Shira went publicly with her campaign against her attacker and became an inspiration to all women out there on the quest to break the cycle of domestic violence. And she did it with so much compassion, kindness, and a beautiful smile, and managed to turn a tragedy to a source of pride. So, Shana Tova, Shira, and Shana Tova to all of you.
Only Wonder Woman, Yonit. Only Gal Gadot. Okay, so listen, I'm very, very proud that I know Sacha Baron Cohen. How on earth do you know Wonder Woman herself?
Well, we were in the same youth movement. No, we weren't. I was in the youth movement of people who have imaginary friends, so I probably didn't meet anyone then. But no, it's Israel, Jonathan. There's 1 degree of separation between any two people in this country. You know this. So I was, I think, introduced to Gal, I guess 15 years ago by a very close friend, also incidentally named Gal. This is a very common name in Israel. And ever since we've known each other, I have to say that huge fame has not changed her one bit. She's still the nicest person, the coolest, very down to earth, very, very intelligent, just incredibly sweet. And she recorded this Mensch of the Year for us, and I think she chose beautifully because Shira has really just become this heroine this year in Israel and symbolizes what you can do if you realize that you have the power to make a change.
I think it's amazing. I think our two Hollywood A-listers could themselves have make a major bid for Mensch of the Week status for us. Sacha Baron Cohen doing with that choice of Mark Benioff, telling that story about getting health equipment, protective equipment into the British Health Service, and Sacha obviously does a huge amount philanthropically himself, big campaigner on the social networks and for Save the Children and all kinds of other charities. So the pair of them could absolutely be our joint Mensch of the Week. And I thought Gal's choice of Shira, the campaigner on domestic violence, was really good to illuminate that issue. We have to, just you and me now, Hollywood B or C listers, need to come up with our own nominations for the week, I think.
You can't monkey with tradition. That is our weekly tradition, right? We just have
It is exactly. That is our custom here. So why don't you, have you got some, chutzpah of the week is our first order of business. Who do you think has acted, to quote Sacha, chutzpah-dickily, which was a great little coinage in our Hebrew corner, Yiddish corner.
Do you think we should use it? So, okay, mine is an Israeli politician, the first Israeli politician ever to be flagged by Twitter by posting fake news. That dubious honor was given to Netanyahu loyalist in the Likud, MK Galit Distal Atbarian, who posted a doctored video of President Biden allegedly falling asleep during the meeting between Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. I should say she's also an author, so she probably knows something about fiction. This became viral in Hebrew, and she claimed she posted an original White House video, which she didn't. She claimed she never said Biden was asleep. She did, and I think that's a worthy chutzpah nominee for this week.
No, I think she has definitely acted chutzpah-dickily, and she is a worthy nominee. My offer would be a man called Fritz Berggren, who is an official of the United States State Department, who is under fire because at least 70 of his co-workers have complained about posts he has made on social media, which they say are anti-Semitic, and he's published them on his own website, which has featured screeds against Jews, including the statement that Jews are not God's chosen people, that Judeo-Christian is Antichrist, Jewish ideas poison people. So, he doesn't seem like a great guy. Incredible that he is an employee of the State Department, and he's become the subject of this sort of protest, really, and a bit of a rebellion by State Department employees saying that they don't feel safe with him around. So they say he's violated department rules and ethical standards. I think we can say someone posting like that has definitely chutzpah at the very, very least.
Look at you putting us in the mood for Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, he could do a bit of al-Khait, couldn't he?
Just a little bit.
The only problem is the religion is, in his view, the religion of the Antichrist. But apart from that, I think he may well want to learn the al-Khait.
Technical details.
Technical detail. So for Mensch, I think we joked before about this story being an absolute perennial, which is, again, about Afghanistan. every news organization, every correspondent in Afghanistan at some point has filed the story about the last Jew in Afghanistan. In fact, there were two of them and they were warring with each other.
Of course
I'm sure
they
we
were.
talked about this. They argued over, this was the synagogue I wouldn't be seen dead in. Just the two of them hated each other. And the story was told that they were both put in jail and eventually the Taliban kicked them out of jail because it just couldn't bear listening to the two of them arguing anymore, which, is one of those stories that is too good to check. We want that to be true. Anyway, there was an effort by Moshe Margaretin, who is a Haredi Orthodox fixer, who specializes in rescuing Jews, bringing them out of danger. He wanted to get the last Jew in Afghanistan out of Afghanistan, didn't realize that actually there's always trouble, and that the last Jew, Zavulun Simantov, didn't want to leave for a complicated story involving a decree of divorce with his wife. He didn't want to leave, and so the resources were already been deployed, and the man he dispatched to release the last Jew out of Afghanistan said, look, I can't get him out, he doesn't want to leave. But there is a whole lot of other people who want to get out, including members of the country's national women's soccer team, judges, prosecutors. He turned round to Moshe Margaretin and said, do you want to pay for them to get out? And Margaretin, instead of saying, no, it was only the other guy I wanted, he said yes. He drummed up $80,000 from his Haredi Orthodox Jewish community, and they got a whole lot of people out. It seems like it's upwards of around 46 people, families, the judge, the prosecutor, but their families as well. It's pretty impressive and great Rahmanas, great human compassion. And I think Moshe Margaretin would be a worthy Mensch of the week.
I think that's a very good choice on your part, Johnny.
Good. I stick with Johnny, Yoni. I like it. It makes me feel at home. You and I can go hiking.
It's a slippery.
You can call me Johnny.
Only in the Welsh countryside, it's a slippery slope because from Johnny we go to Yoni, and then it's Yoni and Yonit. We have to start a band. It's we were going with there's a wrong direction. So this was season 2, episode 1. We wanted to remind you can also find us on the weekly newsletter of The Forward and El Al Flights.
And since you mentioned The Forward, actually both our Chutzpah and Mensch nominees did have their stories reported in The Forward. So it is very timely that you can find us in their weekly newsletter. You can, of course, also find us on our Instagram at 2Jews. No numbers, just letters. Subscribe, follow, just somehow show the love. We are here for season 2, but unlike some shows, we are not killing off any main characters.
Yet. But we will give you a list of main characters that we want to thank. Our executive producer, Lior Friedman, gets the biggest thank. And, of course, also Rom Atik and Omer Primat, Rad Eshel for original music, and the great team at Keshet, Idan El Rom, and Itai Dankner. Jonathan, Johnny Friedland, you owe me about 5 honey cakes. Have a great year.
It would be such a pleasure, wouldn't it, to sit and have honey cake together. Thank you for that, for those wishes. Shana Tova, peaceful and happy new year to you too, Yonit, and to our listeners.
Shana Tova. We'll see you next week.